Hey guys, Phil here from the Blue Envelope channel. Growing up, for some reason I was really into Simon and Garfunkel. Something about that harmony that they could do. I really liked that, and I bought their box sets and had a lot of their albums. And one of their top songs I think is "The Sound of Silence," and it's maybe one of those rare songs where the cover might even be better than the original. I don't know, but the one that Disturbed did a couple years back, where they covered that, super good. And there's that one line in there where they say, "Fools, I said, you do not know. Silence, like a cancer, grows." And I guess that's what I was thinking about a little bit when thinking about making this video about race and inequality in Jehovah's Witnesses. And honestly, growing up, I never noticed any prejudice or felt there were any racial problems in the organization, which imagine that, me, a white male, never experienced any uh, injustice or inequality. And so I don't think I'm speaking from a place of expertise in this subject, but all the same, I think it's good to break the silence, as the song says. Um, and so there's no real flow to this video. It's just some random thoughts I was thinking about. I know growing up, I never really, like I say, felt like there was racism or racial problems among Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think my parents did a good job of raising me and my sister to not consider race when we were thinking about other people. They both came of age during the Civil Rights Movement and Martin Luther King Jr., and they lived in the Northeast. So I, I don't know that they were really involved at all in the Civil Rights Movement, but they definitely supported it. And I can remember my dad telling us stories, like he was always around black people growing up, black athletes that he was on different teams with in high school, in the National Guard the same way. And he would tell us stories when we were little about, joking around with black kids in the school about essentially how idiotic racism was. And I think they raised us well, in that vein. Um, the couple that converted my parents to Jehovah's Witnesses were black, Howard and Adassa. Howard is African American, and Adassa is Jamaican, and super friendly, outgoing couple. Honestly, I don't like if they've been studying with a different couple, a more boring or strict couple. I do wonder whether my parents would have converted to the religion. I think the social connection that they had with Howard and Adassa was a huge factor in getting them converted. Um, so they were a really strong influence for me growing up because, once my parents got baptized, that inevitably caused rifts between them and their parents. They stopped going to all the family holiday parties and birthday parties, and it got busier and busier as witnesses, so they couldn't make family dinners and that kind of thing. So I didn't see my grandparents a ton growing up, and Howard and Adassa kind of became like my spiritual grandparents, basically. And so me and my sister would go over to their house and play, or if if their grandkids were in town, we'd hang out and play together. I can remember how, for whatever reason, I was always fascinated by, they had one of those mbira instruments in their attic. It's like one of those boxes with the metal prongs on it that you kind of plink, plink, plunk. And I can remember always playing with the mbira when I'd go over to their house there. And Howard is a kind of a big wig, I guess you could say, in the Rochester, New York area. he was one of the overseers on the regional building committee when they had those. He was an electrician, so he was in charge of the sound and alarm system installation on new builds. And he was the overseer for the sound department at the district conventions and would oversee setting up all the speakers for the conventions in the summer. So yeah, I never had a sense that being black would hold you back in the organization. And then the same way, once we moved a few years later, we moved up to Jamestown, New York, in the western part of the New York State. There was a brother in our circuit there, Willie Bragg, and he was a black brother, and again, kind of a head honcho. He was presiding overseer, city overseer in Dunkirk, New York, and had this really powerful, like voice of God kind of voice. And he was always one of the best speakers at the assemblies and conventions. So he got used a ton in the organization there. Now, I will say, I can remember, we'd go out when my dad would give talks a lot. And I can remember going to some of the, just because of the way the population was set up in Rochester, there'd be some congregations that were mostly black, just by virtue of where their territory was. And I can remember when we go to those congregations, always, you always feel a little bit off kilter, like not unwelcome at all, but I could sense there was a difference there, and it was now I was the minority, and again, not unfriendly at all, but just that sense of standing out as different from the majority was a new feeling toward me that was unsettling a little bit. I can remember going to one family's house after the meeting for hospitality, and they they served us sweet tea, iced tea, and my dad loves iced tea, but I don't know if I'd ever had it before, and I could just remember the strangeness of it. Like I didn't really like it, and for that family, tea was just the normal drink that everybody drank. So again, just that feeling of difference. And I just can't help but think that how I would feel that way once in a while going to a Sunday meeting, that was probably how, black witnesses felt all the time belonging to a majority white congregation, which is how our own congregation was, where Howard and Adasa went to. They were one of the few black families in the congregation. I can remember another congregation we were in. We were in a lot of congregations, and there was a brother Eddie there, super friendly guy, and he had a little, as I remember right, he had a little soul patch under his lip there, and kind of like for, as I understand, a lot of black guys have trouble, being clean shaven just because the way their hair grows. And so, a soul patch is a little way to get around that difficulty. Of course, for witnesses, at that time, beards were absolutely forbidden, even something as minor, like you could have a mustache, but you couldn't have a soul patch. And so Eddie, even though he was completely, upstanding in every other way and used to the fullest extent that he could, is running the sound system, and he was the assistant in the literature or magazine department, but never appointed as a ministerial servant, never went to the next level. And even though, you could argue that the soul patch was like a medical thing, basically, but that it was still a no-go. So that's one thing I kind of think about looking back now, that well, there wasn't any overt racism that I ever saw, or prejudice. it was really important for Black witnesses um, to not be too assertive or try to rock the boat at all, to get militant at all about, improving their lot and trying to change things in the organization. I always had to be very, go with the program, which I think to some extent is not a racial thing. It's just a thing with Christianity, where everybody has low self-esteem because you're always being told that you're good for nothing and fallen from perfection, and it's only by the grace of God that we can accomplish anything. And so that's just kind of ingrained into a lot of Christian doctrine, that we're worthless and don't deserve to do anything on our own. We need the ransom to save us. And I mean, so waiting on Jehovah to fix everything is not too bad, really, for if you're white, because things aren't too bad overall. But if you're a person of color in the United States, there is a lot of things that need fixing, but still forbidden from doing anything, certainly, but even talking about doing anything or protesting, or that was definitely a no-go. You needed to sit on the sidelines. I was reading the other day, there was the big March on Washington, the Civil Rights March in 1963, where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. And then a few months later, which they must have written it, with the lead time, they must have written it almost immediately after the march happened. There was an article in I think the November week that year of '63. And it covered the march pretty thoroughly, but then the whole last part of the article is all about why certain Black witnesses, never saying Jehovah's Witnesses, but that you could tell that's what they would mean, but why they didn't go to the march or support the civil rights movement. And it's very important to be passive and never try to improve things right now. So that's one thing you see. Another thing I notice more so now is how much language there is in the literature about slavery, and overtones of how it's basically good to be a slave, and if you are a slave, good for you. Stick to your lot in life. And it's always in the context of Christianity and being a slave for God, and but with the history of slavery in the United States in particular, I mean, it's just it's not good. It doesn't come off well. And, to some extent, the society has leaned into it a little bit with how they talk about, I guess, especially with the term overseer that they use so much, school overseer, presiding overseer, city overseer, circuit overseer, district overseer, branch overseer. And then so you have all these overseers, and then you have everybody's a servant of Jehovah, a slave of Jehovah. Don't they? Isn't there another term that they can use? Witnesses love to invent special terms, loaded language that only the organization uses. Isn't there another word they could use besides overseer? I think thinking about this issue it's really helpful to frame the organization in terms of being a company, of being a sales corporation. And if you view it through that lens, which I think is pretty accurate, definitely before 1990 when they went to the donation arrangement, but it's still basically that way, where they're pushing a product. The society will never act in any way that might in any possible way jeopardize sales or jeopardize new subscriptions, new memberships. And that basically is kind of their guiding light in how they do things. And so that helps explain, for example, why beards were always forbidden, because if there was any chance that some people out in the territory might have this perception of a guy with a beard that he's a hippie and it's not respectable. So that's why, male witnesses could never have beards. It couldn't hurt sales. And the same way too, when you see the society's racial history is just kind of drifted along with the norms of society in general. And so if there was when there was a time in the US when segregation was kind of the norm and what everybody supported, especially in certain parts of the country, well, then the Jehovah's Witnesses were going to go with segregation. And then once as time went by and things, integration became the norm and people supported civil rights, well, then Jehovah's Witnesses went with that and they integrated everything. I always kind of picture it in my head like a boat going down the Mississippi River. And so the boat always stays in the middle of the river, and it'll follow the twists and turns that the river makes, but it's never going to veer toward one bank or the other bank. It's always going to stay right in the middle. And that's what the organization's like. It's always going to pick the blandest, most boring, inoffensive, the blandest course of action possible, the most inoffensive thing that will please the largest number of potential customers in their territory. And that's what they'll do to maximize the sales potential. So that really explains the society's course of action in everything, including in matters of racial injustice. Maybe the only time you'll see the society kind of put its foot down and plant a flag is if it's something that will impact its sales. And so, for example, you see that with a few years ago when they had that big letter writing campaign to Russia, when Putin was cracking down on the witnesses there. And so the society took a stand because Russia is a huge sales territory. I forget how many witnesses were there, 200, 300,000 witnesses there. So the society could not afford to lose that many members. And so then they did, organize essentially a protest to move the needle politically. When you really get down and think about it, the thing is that the society needs there to be problems in the world, because that's what they're offering is a solution to the problems in the world. That's their product. And so I can remember in Jamestown, New York, there was Allen Street and Barrow Street were in our territory, and they were the dirtiest, filthiest streets in the whole territory. Just everybody was on welfare in those streets. The yards were all just dirt and chain link fences, and the kids were always filthy and just wearing diapers, and all the people there we called them white trash. They're just all these people on welfare. But we didn't like going to preach in that territory, yet at the same time, you knew you would have awesome results. You'd have lots of great conversations and place lots of literature. And everybody had, return visits and Bible studies on Allen Street and Barrow Street, because the product that we were offering these people was so so appealing. That is they needed that solution for their lives because their lives were so terrible. And I think to some extent that explains why there's so many black witnesses that have come into the organization over the years, is because, again, there a lot of times people of color are um, their lives are not great, and so the message that witnesses are offering is appealing, that of equality and good good economic situation and all that stuff, paradise and tropical fruit, and uh, and I feel like a lot of times you see, at least in over my years as a witness, that generally black families were more zealous. They were more dedicated and hardcore than some of the white family. Like, it was always white people that were inactive or kind of drifting off the edges, but black families were in it for the long haul and super loyal to the organization. So that just kind of helps explain why the society is never, ever, ever going to get involved um, with trying to correct and make better the world right now, because that would be killing their product that they're selling, and so you're never going to see them make a statement or support witnesses protesting or anything like that. Um, and so, as I think back now, the idea that I had that there was really no racial inequality or overt racism in the organization was really kind of ignoring the whole systemic racism that was just built into society in general, and then adopted by the Watchtower Society as part of that larger society. And that was something that I really didn't discern during my time as a witness. Um, and so I'm hoping now that I can kind of keep learn how to have a small part in correcting that inequality, that injustice. And so I think that's why it's important to talk about George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, because as you correct those problems in the world, um, you're hurting the the Watchtower organization's message. Um, I mean, how awesome would that be to have the world improve to such an extent that the whole JW message basically becomes irrelevant? Because when you're talking about, hey, a time without problems here on Earth, and people say, oh, actually things are pretty decent. I don't think we need that. How cool would that be? And so really, from that perspective, improving things in the world right now, little by little, um, is kind of helping bring about or speed up the demise of Watchtower. And so that's kind of awesome. Yeah, so those were just some of the thoughts I was been thinking about the last couple weeks, and thought I'd put them out there for what it's worth. Hey, thanks for watching. Take care.